Chapter 22. Leroy Meets the Locker of Doom. I'd never gone through security with a live bird of prey before. I thought it would cause a holdup, but instead the guards moved us to a special line. They checked our paperwork. Bass smiled a lot, flirted with the guards, and told them they must be working out, and they waved us through. Bass' knives didn't set off the alarms, so maybe she'd stored them in the do-wot. The guards didn't even try to put Sadie through the x-ray machine. I was retrieving my shoes when I heard a scream from the other side of security. Bast cursed in Egyptian. We were too slow. I looked back and saw the set animal charging through the terminal, knocking passengers out of its way. Its weird rabbit ears swiveled back and forth. Foam dripped from its curved, toothy snout, and its forked tail lashed around, looking for something to sting. "Moose!" a lady cried. "Rabid moose!" Everyone started screaming, running in different directions, and blocking the set animal's path. Moose? I wondered. Bass shrugged. No telling what mortals will perceive. Now the idea will spread by power of suggestion. Sure enough, more passengers started yelling, "Moose!" and running around as the set animal plowed through the lines and got tangled up in the stanchions. TSA officers surged forward, but the set animal tossed them aside like rag dolls. "Come on," Bass told me. "I can't just let it hurt these people. We can't stop it." But I didn't move. I wanted to believe Horace was giving me courage, or that maybe the past few days had finally woken up some dormant bravery gene I'd inherited from my parents. But the truth was scarier. This time, nobody was making me take a stand. I wanted to do it. People were in trouble because of us. I had to fix it. I felt the same kind of instinct when I felt when Sadie needed my help. Like it was time for me to step up. And yes, it terrified me, but it also felt right. "Go to the gate," I told Bast. "Take Sadie. I'll meet you there." "What? Carter." "Go." I imagined opening my invisible locker. 13, 32, 33. I reached out my hand, but not for my dad's magic box. I concentrated on something I'd lost in Luxor. It had to be there. For a moment, I felt nothing. Then my hand closed around a hard leather grip, and I pulled my sword out of nowhere. Bast's eyes widened. "Impressive." "Get moving," I said. "It's my turn to run interference." "You realize it'll kill you." "Thanks for that vote of confidence. Now scat." Now Bast took off at top speed, Sadie flapping to stay balanced on her arm. A shot rang out. I turned and saw the set animal plow into a cop who'd just fired at its head, to no effect. The poor cop flew backward and toppled over the metal detector gate. "Hey, Moose!" I screamed. The set animal locked its glowing eyes on me. "Well done," Horace said. "We will die with honor." Shut up, I thought. I glanced behind me to make sure Bast and Sadie were out of sight. Then I approached the creature. "So you've got no name?" I asked. "They couldn't think of one ugly enough?" The creature snarled, stepping over the unconscious policeman. "Set animal is too hard to say," I decided. "I'll call you Leroy." Apparently Leroy didn't like his name. He lunged. I dodged his claws and managed to smack him in the snout with the flat of my blade, but that barely fazed him. Leroy backed up and charged again, baring his fangs. I slashed at his neck, but Leroy was too smart. He darted to the left and sank his teeth into my free arm. If it hadn't been for my makeshift leather arm guard, I would have been -1 arm. As it was, Leroy's fangs still bit clear through the leather. Red-hot pain shot up my arm. I yelled, and a primal surge of power coursed through my body. I felt myself rising off the ground and the golden aura of the hawk warrior forming around me. The set animal's jaws were pried open so fast that it yelped and let go of my arm. I stood, now encased in a magical barrier twice my normal size, and kicked Leroy into the wall. "Good," said Horace. "Now dispatch the beast to the netherworld." "Quiet, man. I'm doing all the work." I was very vaguely aware of security guards trying to regroup, yelling into their walkie-talkies and calling for help. Travelers were still screaming and running around. I heard a little girl shout, "Chicken Man, get the moose!" You know how hard it is to feel like an extreme falcon-headed combat machine when somebody calls you Chicken Man? I raised my sword, which was now at the center of a 10-foot-long energy blade. Leroy shook the dust off his cone-shaped ears and came at me again. My armored form might have been powerful, but it was also clumsy and slow. Moving it around felt like moving through jello. Leroy dodged my sword strike and landed on my chest, knocking me down. He was a lot heavier than he looked. His tail and claws raked against my armor. I caught his neck in my glowing fist and tried to keep his fangs away from my face. But everywhere he drooled, my magic shield hissed and steamed. I could feel my wounded arm going numb. Alarms blared. More passengers crowded the checkpoint to see what was happening. I had to end this soon, before I passed out from pain or more mortals got hurt. I felt my strength fading, my shield flickering. Leroy's fangs were an inch from my face, and Horace was offering no words of encouragement. Then I thought about my invisible locker in the duat. I wondered if other things could be put there too. Large, evil things. I closed my hands around Leroy's throat and wedged my knee against his ribcage. Then I imagined an opening in the duat, in the air right above me. 13, 32, 33. I imagined my locker opening as wide as it could go. With my last bit of energy, I pushed Leroy straight up. He flew towards the ceiling. His eyes widened with surprise as he passed through an unseen rift and disappeared. "Where'd it go?" someone yelled. "Hey, kid," another guy yelled. "You okay?" My energy shield was gone. I wanted to pass out, but I had to leave before security came out of their shock and arrested me for moose fighting. I got to my feet and threw my sword at the ceiling. It disappeared into the duat. Then I wrapped the torn leather around my bleeding arm as best I could and ran for the gates. I reached our flight just as they were closing the door. Apparently, word of the Chicken Man incident hadn't spread quite yet. The gate agent gestured back towards the checkpoint as she took my ticket. "What's all the noise up there?" "A moose got through security," I said. "It's under control now." Before she could ask questions, I raced down the jetway. I collapsed into my seat across the aisle from Bast. Sadie, still in kite form, was pacing in the window seat next to me. Bast let out a huge sigh of relief. "Carter, you made it. But you're hurt. What happened?" I told her. Bast's eyes widened. "You put the set animal in your locker? Do you know how much strength that requires?" "Yeah," I said. "I was there." The flight attendant started making her announcements. Apparently, the security incident hadn't affected our flight. The plane pushed back from the gate on time. I doubled forward in pain, and only then did Bass notice how bad my arm was. Her expression turned grim. "Hold still." She whispered something in Egyptian, and my eyes began to feel heavy. "You'll need to sleep to heal that wound," she said. "But if Leroy comes back—" "Who?" "Nothing." Bass studied me as if seeing me for the first time. "That was extraordinarily brave, Carter, facing the set monster. You have more tomcat in you than I realized." Thanks." She smiled and touched my forehead. "We'll be in the air soon, my tomcat. Sleep." I couldn't really object. Exhaustion washed over me, and I closed my eyes. Naturally, my soul decided to take a trip. I was in Ba form, circling above Phoenix. It was a brilliant winter morning. The cool desert air felt good under my wings. The city looked different in the daylight. A vast grid of beige and green squares, dotted with palm trees and swimming pools. Stark mountains rose up here and there like chunks of the moon. The most prominent mountain was right below me, a long ridge with two distinct peaks. What has Set's minions called it on my first soul visit? Camelback Mountain? Its foothills were crowded with luxury homes, but the top was barren. Something caught my attention. A crevice between two large boulders and a shimmer of heat coming from deep within the mountain. Something that no human eye would have noticed. I folded my wings and dove towards the crevice. Hot air vented out with such force that I had to push my way through. About 50 feet down, the crevice opened up, and I found myself in a place that simply couldn't exist. The entire inside of the mountain had been hollowed out. In the middle of the cavern, a giant pyramid was under construction. The air rang with the sound of pickaxes. Hordes of demons cut blood-red limestone into blocks and hauled it to the middle of the cave, where more swarms of demons used ropes and ramps to hoist the blocks into place, the way my dad said the Giza pyramids were built. But the Giza pyramids had taken 20 years each to complete. This pyramid was already halfway done. There was something odd about it, too, and not just the blood-red color. When I looked at it, I felt a familiar tingle, as if the whole structure were humming with a tone. No, a voice I almost recognized. I spotted a smaller shape floating in the air above the pyramid. A reed barge like Uncle Amos's riverboat. On it stood two figures. One was a tall demon in leather armor. The other was a burly man in red combat fatigues. I circled closer, trying to stay in the shadows because I wasn't sure I was really invisible. I landed on the top of the mast. It was a tricky maneuver, but neither of the boat's occupants looked up. "How much longer?" asked the man in red. He had Set's voice, but he looked completely different than he had in my last vision. He wasn't a slimy black thing, and he wasn't on fire, except for the scary mixture of hatred and bemusement burning in his eyes. He had a big, thick body like a linebacker's, with meaty hands and a brutish face. His short, bristly hair and trimmed goatee were as red as his combat fatigues. I'd never seen camouflage that color before. Maybe he was planning on hiding out in a volcano. Next to him, the demon bowed and scraped. It was the weird rooster-footed guy I'd seen before. He was at least 7 feet tall and scarecrow thin, with bird talons for feet. And unfortunately, this time I could see his face. It was almost too hideous to describe. You know those anatomy exhibits where they show dead bodies without skin? Imagine one of those faces alive, only with solid black eyes and fangs. "We're making excellent progress, Master," the demon promised. "We conjured 100 more demons today. With luck, we'll be done at sunset on your birthday." "That is unacceptable, Face of Horror," Set said calmly. The servant flinched. I guess his name was Face of Horror. I wondered how long it would take his mom to think of that. Bob? No. Sam? No. How about Face of Horror? But, Master," Face stammered, "I thought—" "Do not think, demon. Our enemies are more resourceful than I imagined. They will have temporarily disabled my favorite pet and are now speeding towards us. We must finish before they arrive. Sunrise on my birthday, Face of Horror. No later. It will be the dawn of my new kingdom. I will scour all life from this continent. And this pyramid shall stand as a monument to my power. The final and eternal tomb of Osiris. My heart almost stopped. I looked down at the pyramid again, and I realized why it felt so familiar. It had an energy to it. My father's energy. I can't explain how, but I knew his sarcophagus lay hidden somewhere inside that pyramid. Set smiled cruelly, as if he would be just as happy to have Face obey him or to rip Face to pieces. You understand my order? Yes, Lord. Face of Horror shifted his bird feet, as if building up his courage. But may I ask, Lord, why stop there? Set's nostrils flared. You are one sentence away from destruction, Face of Horror. Choose your next words carefully. The demon ran his black tongue across his teeth. Well, my lord, is the annihilation of only one god worthy of your glorious self? What if we could create even more chaos energy to feed your pyramid for all time and make you the eternal lord of all worlds? A hungry light danced in Set's eyes. Lord of all worlds. And it has a nice ring to it. And how would you accomplish this, puny demon? Oh, not I, my lord. I'm an insignificant worm, but if we were to capture the others, Nefties. Set kicked Face in the chest, and the demon collapsed, wheezing. I told you never to speak her name. Yes, master. Face panted. Sorry, master. But if we were to capture her and the others, think on the power you could consume. With the right plan. Set began nodding, warming to the idea. I think it's time we put Amos Kane to use. I tensed. Was Amos here? Master, a brilliant plan. Yes, I'm glad I thought of it. Soon, Face of Horror, very soon, Horus, Isis, and my treacherous wife will bow at my feet, and Amos will help. We'll have a nice little family reunion. Set looked up, straight at me, as if he'd known I was there all along, and gave me that rip-you-to-pieces smile. Isn't that right, boy? I wanted to spread my wings and fly. I had to get out of the cavern and warn Sadie, but my wings wouldn't work. I sat there paralyzed as Set reached out to grab me. The Red Pyramid, Chapter 23, Professor Thoth's Final Exam. Sadie here. Sorry for the delay, though I don't suppose you'd notice on a recording. My nimble-fingered brother dropped the microphone into a pit full of... Oh, never mind. Back to the story. Carter woke up with a start. He banged his knee against the drink tray, which was quite funny. Sleep well? I asked. He blinked at me in confusion. You're human. How kind of you to notice. I took another bite of my pizza. I'd never eaten pizza from a china plate or had a Coke in a glass with ice. No less. Americans are so odd. But I was enjoying first class. I changed back an hour ago. I cleared my throat. It was helpful, what you said, about focusing on what's important. Awkward saying even that much, as I remembered everything he told me when I was in kite form about his travels with Dad and how he'd gotten lost in the underground, gotten sick in Venice, squealed like a baby when he'd found a scorpion in his sock. So much ammunition to tease him with, but oddly, I wasn't tempted. The way he'd poured out his soul, perhaps he thought I didn't understand him in kite form, but he'd been so honest, so unguarded. And he'd done all that to calm me down. If he hadn't given me something to focus on, I'd probably still be hunting field mice over the Potomac. Carter had spoken about Dad as if their travels together had been a great thing, yes, but also quite a chore. With Carter always struggling to please and to be on his best behavior with no one to relax with or talk to, Dad was, I had to admit, Quite a presence. You'd be hard-pressed not to want his approval. No doubt that's where I got my own stunningly charismatic personality. I saw him only twice a year, and even so, I had to prepare myself mentally for the experience. For the first time, I began to wonder if Carter really had the better end of the bargain. Would I trade my life for his? I also decided not to tell him what had finally changed me back to human. I hadn't focused on Dad at all. I'd imagined Mum alive. Imagine us walking down Oxford Street together, gazing in the shop's windows, talking and laughing, the kind of ordinary day we'd never gotten to share. An impossible wish, I know, but it had been powerful enough to remind me of who I was. Didn't say any of that, but Carter studied my face, and I sensed that he picked up my thoughts a little too well. I took a sip of my Coke. You missed lunch, by the way. You didn't try to wake me? On the other side of the aisle, Bast burped. She just finished off a plate of salmon and was looking quite satisfied. I could summon more Friskies, she offered. Or cheese sandwiches. No thanks, Carter muttered. He looked devastated. God, Carter, I said. If it's that important to you, I've got some pizza left. It's not that, he said, and he told us how his bar had almost been captured by Seth. The news gave me trouble breathing. I felt as if I was stuck in kite form again, unable to think clearly. Dad trapped in a red pyramid? Poor Amos used as some sort of pawn? I looked at Bass for some kind of reassurance. Isn't anything we can do? Her expression was grim. Sadie, I don't know. Set will be most powerful on his birthday, and sunrise is the most auspicious moment for magic. If he's able to generate one great explosion of storm energy at sunrise on that day, using not only his magic, but augmenting it with the power of other gods he's managed to enslave, the amount of chaos he could unleash is almost unimaginable. She shuddered. Carter, you say a simple demon gave him this idea? Sounded like it, Carter said. Or he tweaked the original plan anyway. She shook her head. This is not like Seth. I coughed. What do you mean? It's exactly like him. No, Bast insisted. This is horrendous, even for him. Seth wishes to be king, but such an explosion might leave him nothing to rule. It's almost as if... She stopped herself, the thought seemingly too disturbing. I don't understand it. But we'll be landing soon. You'll have to ask Thoth. You make it sound like you're not coming, I said. Thoth and I don't get along very well. Your chances of surviving might be better. The seatbelt light came on. The captain announced we'd started our descent into Memphis. I peered out the window and saw a vast brown river cutting across the landscape. A river larger than I had ever seen. It reminded me uncomfortably of a giant snake. The flight attendant came by and pointed to my lunch plate. Finished, dear? It seems so, I told her gloomily. Memphis hadn't gotten word that it was winter. The trees were green and the skies were brilliant blue. We'd insisted Bass not borrow a car this time, so she agreed to rent one as long as she got a convertible. I didn't ask where she got the money, but soon we were cruising through the most deserted streets of Memphis with our BMW's top down. I remember only snapshots of the city. We passed through one neighborhood that might have been a set for Gone with the Wind. Big white mansions on enormous lawns, shaded by cypress trees, although the plastic Santa Claus displays on the rooftop rather killed the effect. On the next block, we almost got killed by an old woman driving a Cadillac out of a church parking lot. Bass swerved and honked her horn, and the woman just smiled and waved. Southern hospitality, I suppose. After a few more blocks, the house turned to run-down shacks. I spotted two African-American boys wearing jeans and muscle shirts, sitting on their front porch, strumming acoustic guitars and singing. They sounded so good I was tempted to stop. On the next corner stood a cinder block restaurant with a hand-painted sign that read Chicken and Waffles. There was a queue of 20 people outside. You Americans have the strangest taste. What planet is this? I asked. Carter shook his head. And where would Thoth be? Bass sniffed the air and turned left onto a street called Poplar. We're getting close. If I know Thoth, he'll find a center of learning. A library, perhaps, or a cache of books in a magician's tomb. Don't have a lot of those in Tennessee, Carter guessed. Then I spotted a sign and grinned broadly. The University of Memphis, perhaps? Well done, Sadie, Bass purred. Carter scowled at me. The poor boy gets jealous, you know. A few minutes later, we were strolling through the campus of a small college. Red brick buildings and wide courtyards. It was eerily quiet, except for the sound of a ball echoing on concrete. As soon as Carter heard it, he perked up. Basketball. Oh, please, I said. We need to find Thoth. But Carter followed the sound of the ball, and we followed him. He rounded the corner of a building and froze. Let's ask them. I didn't understand what he was on about. Then I turned the corner and yelped. On the basketball court, 5 players were in the middle of an intense game. There were an assortment of jerseys from different American teams, and they all seemed keen to win, grunting and snarling at each other, stealing the ball and pushing. Oh, and all the players were all baboons. The sacred animal of Thoth, Bass said. We must be in the right place. One of the baboons had lustrous golden hair, much lighter than the others, and a more colourful bottom. He wore a purple jersey that seemed oddly familiar. Is that a Lakers jersey? I asked, hesitant to even name Carter's silly obsession. He nodded and we both grinned. Khufu! We yelled. True, we hardly knew the baboon. We spent less than a day with him, and our time at Amos's mansion seemed like years ago, but I felt like we'd recovered a long-lost friend. Khufu jumped into my arms and barked at me. Ah, ah! He picked through my hair, looking for bugs, I suppose. No comments from you, Carter. And dropped to the ground, slapping the pavement to show how pleased he was. Bass laughed. He says you smell like flamingos. You speak baboon? Carter asked. The goddess shrugged. He also wants to know where you've been. Where we've been? I asked. Well, first off, tell him I've spent the better part of the day as a kite, which is not a flamingo and does not end in O, so it shouldn't be on his diet. Secondly, hold on. Bass turned to Khufu and said, ah? Then she looked back at me. All right, go ahead. I blinked. Okay, and secondly, where has he been? She relayed this in a single grunt. Khufu snorted and grabbed the basketball, which sent his baboon friends into a frenzy of barking and scratching and snarling. He dove into the river and swam back, Bass translated. But when he returned, the house was destroyed and we were gone. He waited a day for Amos to return, but he never did. So Khufu made his way to Thoth. Baboons are under his protection, after all. Why is that? Carter asked. I mean, no offense, but Thoth is the god of knowledge, right? Baboons are very wise animals, Bass said. Ah! Khufu picked his nose, then turned his technicolor bum all direction. He threw his friends the ball. They began to fight over it, showing one another their fangs and slapping their heads. Wise? I asked. Well, they're not cats, mind you, Bass said, but yes, wise. Khufu says that as soon as Carter keeps his promise, he'll take you to the professor. I blinked. Oh, you mean, right. What promise? Carter asked. The corner of Bath's mouth twitched. Apparently, you promised to show him your basketball skills. Carter's eyes widened in alarm. We don't have time. Oh, it's fine, Bass promised. It's best that I go now. But where, Bass? I asked, as I was anxious to be I wasn't anxious to be separated from her again. How will you find us? The look in her eyes changed to something like guilt, as if she'd just caused a horrible accident. I'll find you when you get out. If you get out. What do you mean, if? Carter asked, but Bess had already turned into Muffin and raced off. Khufu barked at Carter almost incessantly. He tugged his hand, pulling him onto the court. The baboons immediately broke into two teams. Half took off their jerseys, half left them on. Carter, sadly, was on the no-jersey team, and Khufu helped him pull his shirt off, exposing his bony chest. The teams began to play. Now, I know nothing about basketball, but I'm fairly sure that one isn't supposed to trip over one's shoes or catch a pass with one's forehead or dribble, is that the word, with both hands as if petting a possibly rabid dog. But that is exactly the way Carter played. The baboons simply ran over him, quite literally. They scored basket after basket as Carter staggered back and forth, getting hit with the ball whenever it came close to him, tripping over monkey limbs until he was so dizzy he turned into a circle and fell over. The baboons stopped playing and watched him in disbelief. Carter lay in the middle of the court, covered in sweat and panting. The other baboons looked at Khufu. It was quite obvious what they were thinking. Who invited this human? Khufu covered his eyes in shame. Carter, I said with glee. All that talk about basketball and the Lakers. And you're absolute rubbish. Beaten by monkeys. He groaned miserably. It was Dad's favorite game. I stared at him. Dad's favorite game. God, why hadn't that occurred to me? Apparently, he took my gobsmacked expression as further criticism. I can tell you any NBA stat you want, he said, a bit desperately. Rebounds, assists, free throw percentages. The other baboons went back to the game, ignoring Carter and Khufu both. Khufu let out a disgusted noise, half gag and half bark. I understood the sentiment, but I came forward and offered Carter my hand. Come on, then. It doesn't matter. If I had better shoes, he suggested, or if I wasn't so tired. Carter, I said with a smirk, it doesn't matter. And I'll not breathe a word to Dad when we save him. He looked at me with obvious gratitude. Well, I am rather wonderful, after all. Then he took my hand, and I hoisted him up. Now, for God's sake, put your shirt on, I said, and Khufu, it's time you took us to the professor. Khufu led us to a deserted science building. The air in the hallway smelled of vinegar, and the empty classroom labs looked something out of an American high school. Not a sort of place a god would hang out. We climbed the stairs and found a row of professors' offices. Most of the doors were closed. One had been left open, revealing a space no bigger than a broom closet, stuffed with books, a tiny desk, and one chair. I wondered if that professor had done something bad to get such a small office. Ah! Khufu stopped in front of a polished mahogany door, much nicer than the others. A newly stenciled name glistened on the door. Dr. Thoth. Without knocking, Khufu opened the door and waddled inside. After you, chicken man, I said to Carter. And yes, I'm sure he was regretting telling me about that particular incident. After all, I couldn't completely stop teasing him. I have a reputation to maintain. I expected another broom closet. Instead, the office was impossibly big. The ceiling rose at least 10 meters, with one side of the office all windows, looking out over the Memphis skyline. Metal stairs led up to a loft dominated by an enormous telescope, and from somewhere up there came the sound of an electric guitar being strummed quite badly. The other walls of the office were crammed with bookshelves. Work tables overflowed with weird bits and bobs, chemistry sets, half-assembled computers, stuffed animals with electrical wires sticking out of their heads. The room smelled strongly of cooked beef, but with a smokier, tangier scent than I'd ever smelled. Strangest of all, right in front of us, half a dozen long-necked birds, ibises, sat behind desks like receptionists, typing on laptop computers with their beaks. Carter and I looked at each other. For once, I was at a loss for words. Ah! Khufu called out. Up in the loft, the strumming stopped. A lanky man in his 20s stood up, electric guitar in hand. He had unruly mane of blonde hair, like Khufu's, and he wore a stained white lab coat over faded jeans and a black t-shirt. At first I thought blood was trickling from the corner of his mouth. Then I realized it was some sort of meat sauce. Fascinating. He broke into a wide grin. I've discovered something, Khufu. This is not Memphis, Egypt. Khufu gave me a sideways look, and I could swear his expression meant, duh. I've also discovered a strange form of magic called blues music, the man continued, and barbecue. Yes, you must try barbecue. Khufu looked unimpressed. He climbed up to the top of a bookshelf, grabbed a box of Cheerios, and began to munch. The guitar man slid down the banister with perfect balance and landed in front of us. Isis and Horus, he said. I see you found new bodies. His eyes were a dozen colors, shifting like a kaleidoscope with hypnotic effect. I managed to stutter. We're not... Oh, I see, he said, trying to share the body, eh? Don't think I'm fooled for a minute, Isis. I know you're in charge. But she's not, I persisted. My name is Sadie Kane. I assume you're Thoth? He raised an eyebrow. You claim not to know me? Of course I'm Thoth. Thoth looked offended. In ancient Egyptian, it's a perfectly fine name. The Greeks called me Thoth. Then later they confused me with their god Hermes. Even had the nerve to rename my sacred city Hermopolis. They were nothing alike. Believe me, if you've ever met Hermes. Ah! Khufu yelled through a mouthful of Cheerios. You're right, Thoth agreed. I'm getting off track. So you claim to be Sadie Kane, and he swung a finger towards Carter, who was watching the ibises type on their laptops. I suppose you're not Horus. Carter, Kane, said Carter, still distracted by the ibis's screen. What is that? Thoth brightened. Yes, they're called computers. Marvelous, aren't they? Apparently. No, I mean, what are the birds typing? Carter squinted and read from the screen. A short treatise on the evolution of yaks? My scholarly essays, Thoth explained. I try to keep several projects going at once. For instance, did you know that this university does not offer majors in astrology or leechcraft? Shocking. I intend to change that. I'm renovating new headquarters right now down by the river. Soon, Memphis will be a true center of learning. That's brilliant, I said half-heartedly. We need help defeating Set. The ibises stopped typing and stared at me. Thoth wiped the barbecue sauce off his mouth. You have the nerve to ask this after last time. Last time? I repeated. I have the account here somewhere. Thoth patted the pockets of his lab coat. He pulled out a rumpled piece of paper and read it. No, grocery list. He tossed it over his shoulder. As soon as the paper hit the floor, it became a loaf of wheat bread, a jug of milk, and a 6-pack of Mountain Dew. Thoth checked his sleeves. I realized the stains on his coat were smeared with words, printed in every language. The stains moved and changed, forming hieroglyphs, English letters, Demotic symbols. He brushed the stain off his lapel, and 7 letters fluttered to the floor, forming a word, crawdad. The word morphed into a slimy crustacean, like a shrimp, which wiggled its legs for only a moment before an ibis snatched it up. Never mind, Thoth said at last. I'll just tell you the short version. To avenge his father, Osiris, Horus challenged Set to a duel. The winner would become king of the gods. Horus won, Carter said. You do remember? No, I read about it. And do you remember that without my help, Isis and you would have died? Oh, I tried to mediate a solution to prevent the battle. That is one of my jobs, you know? To keep balance between order and chaos. But no... Isis convinced me to help your side because Seth was getting too powerful and the battle almost destroyed the world. He complains too much, Isis said in my head. It wasn't so bad. No, Thoth demanded, and I got the feeling he could hear her voice as well as I could. Seth stabbed out Horus's eye. Ouch, Carter blinked. Yes, and I replaced it with a new eye made of moonlight. The Eye of Horus, your famous symbol. That was me. Thank you very much. But when you cut off Isis's head... Hold up, Carter glanced at me. I cut off her head. I got better, Isis assured me. Only because I healed you, Isis, Thoth said. And yes, Carter, Horus, whatever you call yourself, you were so mad you cut off her head. You were reckless, you see, about to charge Set while you were still weak and Isis tried to stop you. That made you so angry you took your sword. Well, the point is, you almost destroyed each other before you could defeat Seth. If you start another fight with the Red Lord, beware. He will use chaos to turn you against each other. We'll defeat him again, Isis promised. Thoth is just jealous. Shut up, Thoth said, at the same time I did. He looked at me with surprise. So, Sadie, you are trying to stay in control. It won't last. You may be blood of the pharaohs, but Isis is a deceptive, power-hungry. I can contain her, I said, and I had to use all my will to keep Isis from blurting out a string of insults. Thoth fingered the frets of his guitar. Don't be so sure. Isis probably told you that she could help you defeat Set. Did she also tell you she was the reason Set got out of control in the first place? She exiled our first king. You mean Ra? Carter asked. Didn't he get old and decide to leave the earth? Thoth snorted. He was old, yes, but he was forced to leave. Isis got tired of waiting for him to retire. She wanted her husband Osiris to become king. She also wanted more power. So one day, while Ra was napping, Isis secretly collected a bit of the sun god's drool. Ew, I said. Since when does drool make you powerful? Thoth scowled at me accusingly. You mixed the spit with clay to create a poisonous snake. That night, the serpent slipped into Ra's bedroom and bit him on the ankle. No amount of magic, even mine, could heal him. He would have died. Gods can die? Carter asked. Oh, yes, Thoth said. Of course, most of the time we rise again from the duat, eventually. But this poison ate away at Ra's very being. Isis, of course, acted innocent. She cried to see Ra in pain. She tried to help him with her magic. Finally, she told Ra there was only one way to save him. Ra must tell her his secret name. Secret name? I asked, like Bruce Wayne. Everything in creation has a secret name, Thoth said. Even gods. To know a being's secret name is to have power over that creature. Isis promised that with Ra's secret name, she could heal him. Ra was in so much pain, he agreed, and Isis healed him. But it gave her power over him, Carter guessed. Extreme power, Thoth agreed. She forced Ra to retreat into the heavens, opening the way for her beloved Osiris to become the new king of the gods. Seth had been an important lieutenant to Ra, but he could not bear to see his brother Osiris become king. This made Set and Osiris enemies. Here we are, 5 millennia later, still fighting that war, all because of Isis. But that's not my fault, I said. I would never do something like that. Wouldn't you? Thoth asked. Wouldn't you do anything to save your family, even to upset the balance of the cosmos? His kaleidoscope eyes locked on mine, and I felt a surge of defiance. Well, why shouldn't I help my family? Who was this nutter in a lab coat telling me what I could and couldn't do? Then I realized I didn't know who was thinking that, Isis or me. Panic started building in my chest. If I couldn't tell my own thoughts from those of Isis, how long before I went completely mad? No, Thoth, I croaked. You have to believe me. I'm in control, me, Sadie, and I need your help. Set has our father. I let it spill out then. Everything from the British Museum to Carter's vision of the Red Pyramid. Thoth listened without comment, but I could swear new stains developed on his lab coat as I talked, as if some of my words were being added to the mix. Just look at something for us, I finished. Carter, hand him the book. Carter rummaged through his bag and brought out the book we'd stolen from Paris. You wrote this, right? He said. It tells how to defeat Seth. Thoth unfolded the papyrus pages. Oh dear, I hate reading my old work. Look at this sentence. I'd never written it like that way now. He patted his lab coat pockets. Red pen. Does anyone have one? Isis chafed against my willpower, insisting that we blast some sense into Thoth. One fireball, she pleaded. Just one enormous magical fireball, please. I can't say I wasn't tempted, but I kept her under control. Look, Thoth, I said. Seth is about to destroy North America at the very least, possibly the world. Millions of people will die. You said you care about balance. Will you help us or not? For a moment, the only sounds were ibis beaks tapping on keyboards. You are in trouble, Thoth agreed. So let me ask, why do you think your father put you in this position? Why did he release the gods? I almost said to bring Mom back, but I didn't believe that anymore. My mom saw the future, I guess. Something bad was coming. I think she and Dad were trying to stop it. They thought the only way was to release the gods. Even though using the power of the gods is incredibly dangerous for mortals, Thoth pressed, and against the law of the House of Life, a law that I convinced Iskander to make, by the way, I remembered something the old chief lector had told me in the Hall of Ages. Gods have great power, but only humans have creativity. I think my mum convinced Iskander that the rule was wrong. Maybe he couldn't admit it publicly, but she made him change his mind. Whatever is coming is so bad, gods and mortals are going to need each other. And what is coming? Thoth asked. The rise of Seth? His tone was coy, like a teacher trying a trick question. Maybe, I said carefully, but I don't know. Up on the bookshelf, Khufu belched. He bared his fangs in a messy grin. You have a point, Khufu, Thoth mused. She does not sound like Isis. Isis would never admit she doesn't know something. I had to clamp a mental hand over Isis's mouth. Thoth tossed the book back to Carter. Let's see if you act as well as you talk. I will explain the spellbook, provided you prove to me that you truly have control of your gods. You're not simply repeating the same old patterns. A test? Carter asked. We accept. Now hang on, I protested. Maybe being homeschooled, Carter didn't realize that test is normally a bad thing. Wonderful, Thoth said. There is an item of power I require from a magician's tomb. Bring it to me. Which magician's tomb? I asked. But Thoth took a piece of chalk from his lab coat and scribbled something in the air. A doorway opened in front of him. How did you do that? I asked. Bass said we can't summon portals until the demon days. Mortals can't, Thoth agreed, but a god of magic can. If you succeed, we'll have barbecue. The doorway pulled us into a black void, and Thoth's office disappeared. The Red Pyramid, Chapter 24. I blow up some blue suede shoes. Where are we? I asked. We stood on a deserted avenue outside the gates of a large estate. We still seemed to be in Memphis. At least the trees, the weather, the afternoon light were all the same. The estate must have been several acres at least. The white metal gates were done in fancy designs of silhouetted guitar players and musical notes. Behind them, the driveway curved through the trees up to a 2-story house with a white columned portico. Oh no, Carter said. I recognize those gates. What? Why? Dad brought me here once. A great magician's tomb. Thoth has got to be kidding. Carter, what are you talking about? Is someone buried here? He nodded. This is Graceland, home to the most famous musician in the world. Michael Jackson lived here? No, dummy, Carter said. Elvis Presley. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or curse. Elvis Presley? You mean white suits with rhinestones, big slick hair, Grand's record collection. That Elvis? Carter looked around nervously. He drew his sword, even though we seemed to be totally alone. This is where he lived and died. He's buried in the back of the mansion. I stared up at the house. You're telling me Elvis was a magician? Don't know. Carter gripped his sword. Thoth did say something about music being a kind of magic. But something's not right. Why are we the only ones here? There's usually a mob of tourists. Christmas holidays? But no security? I shrugged. Maybe it's like what Zia did at Luxor. Maybe Thoth cleared everyone out. Maybe. But I could tell Carter was still uneasy. He pushed the gates and they opened easily. Not right, he muttered. No, I agreed. But let's go pay our respects. As we walked up the drive, I couldn't help thinking the home of the king wasn't very impressive. Compared to some of the rich and famous homes I'd seen on TV, Elvis's place looked awfully small. It was just 2 stories high, with that white columned portico and brick walls. Ridiculous plaster lions flanked the steps. Perhaps things were simpler back in Elvis's day, or maybe he spent all his money on rhinestone suits. We stopped at the foot of the steps. So Dad brought you here? I asked. Yeah. Carter eyed the lions as if he were expecting them to attack. Dad loves blues and jazz, mostly. But he said Elvis was important because he took African American music and made it popular for white people. He helped invent rock and roll. Anyway, Dad and I were in town for a symposium or something. I don't remember. Dad insisted I come here. Lucky you. And yes, perhaps I was beginning to understand that Carter's life with Dad hadn't been all glamour and holiday. But still, I couldn't help being a bit jealous. Not that I'd ever wanted to see Graceland, of course. But Dad had never insisted on taking me anywhere. At least until the British Museum trip when he disappeared. I hadn't even known Dad was an Elvis fan, which was rather horrifying. We walked up the steps. The front door swung open all by itself. I don't like that, Carter said. I turned to look behind us, and my blood went ice cold. I grabbed my brother's arm. Carter, speaking of things we don't like. Coming up the driveway were 2 magicians, brandishing staffs and wands. Inside, Carter said. Quick! I didn't have much time to admire the house. There was a dining room to our left and a living room, music room to our right with a piano and a stained glass archway decorated with peacocks. All the furniture was roped off. The house smelled like old people. Item of power, I said. Where? I don't know, Carter snapped. They didn't have items of power listed on the tour. I glanced out the window. Our enemies were getting close. The bloke in front wore jeans, a black sleeveless shirt, boots, and a battered cowboy hat. He looked more like an outlaw than a magician. His friend was similarly dressed, but much heftier, with tattooed arms, a bald head, and a scraggly beard. When they were 10 meters away, the man with the cowboy hat lowered his staff, which morphed into a shotgun. Oh, please, I yelled, and pushed Carter into the living room. The blast shattered Elvis's front door and set my ears ringing. We scrambled to our feet and ran deeper into the house. We passed through an old-fashioned kitchen, then into the strangest den I'd ever seen. The back wall was made of vine-covered bricks, with a waterfall trickling down the side. The carpet was green shag, floor and ceiling, mind you. And the furniture was carved with creepy animal shapes. Just in case all that wasn't dreadful enough, plaster monkeys and stuffed lions had been strategically placed around the room. Despite the danger we were in, the place was so horrid, I just had to stop and marvel. God, I said, did Elvis have no taste? The jungle room, Carter said. He decorated it like this to annoy his dad. I can respect that. Another shotgun blast roared through the house. "Split up," Carter said. "Bad idea." I could hear the magicians tromping through the rooms, smashing things as they came closer. "I'll distract them," Carter said. "You search. The trophy room is through there." "Carter!" But the fool ran off to protect me. I hate when he does that. I should have followed him, or run the other way, but I just stood frozen in shock as he turned the corner with his sword raised. His body began to glow with a golden light, and everything went wrong. Blam! An emerald flash brought Carter to his knees. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd been hit with a shotgun, and I had to stifle a scream. But immediately, Carter collapsed and began to shrink, clothes, sword and all, melting into a tiny sliver of green. The lizard that used to be my brother raced towards me, climbed up my leg and into my palm where it looked at me desperately. From around the corner, a gruff voice said, "Split up and find the sister. She'll be somewhere close." "Oh, Carter," I whispered fondly to the lizard. "I will so kill you for this." I stuffed him in my pocket and ran. The two magicians continued to smash and crash their way through Graceland, knocking over furniture and blasting things into bits. Apparently, they were not Elvis fans. I ducked under some ropes, crept through a hallway, and found the trophy room. Amazingly, it was full of trophies. Gold records crowded the walls. Rhinestone Elvis jumpsuits glittered in 4 glass cases. The room was dimly lit, probably to keep the jumpsuits from blinding visitors, and music played softly from overhead speakers, Elvis warning everyone not to step on his blue suede shoes. I scanned the room, but found nothing that looked magical. The suits? I hope Thoth did not expect me to wear one. The gold records? Lovely frisbees, but no. "Jared!" a voice called to my right. A magician was coming down the hallway. I darted toward the other exit, but a voice just outside it called back, "Yeah, I'm over here." I was surrounded. "Carter," I whispered, "curse your lizard brain." He fluttered nervously in my pocket, but was no help. I fumbled through my magician's bag and grasped my wand. Should I try drawing a magic circle? No time, and I didn't want to duel toe-to-toe with 2 older magicians. I had to stay mobile. I took up my rod and willed it into a full-length staff. I could set it on fire or turn it into a lion, but what good would that do? My hands started to tremble. I wanted to crawl into a ball and hide beneath Elvis's gold record collection. "Let me take over," Isis said. "I can turn our enemies to dust." "No," I told her. "You will get us both killed." I could feel her pressing against my will, trying to bust out. I could taste her anger with the magicians. How dare they challenge us? With a word, we could destroy them. "No," I thought again. Then I remembered something Zia had said. Use whatever you have available. The room was dimly lit. Perhaps if I could make it darker. "Darkness," I whispered. I felt a tugging sensation in my stomach, and the lights flickered off. The music stopped. The light continued to dim. Even the sunlight faded from the windows until the room went entirely black. Somewhere to my left, the first magician sighed in exasperation. "Jared!" "Was it me, Wayne?" Jared insisted. "You always blame me." Wayne muttered something in Egyptian, still moving toward me. I needed a distraction. I closed my eyes and imagined my surroundings. Although it was pitch black, I could still sense Jared in the hallway to my left, stumbling through the darkness. I sensed Wayne on the other side of the wall to the right, only a few steps from the doorway, and I could visualize the 4 glass display cases with Elvis's suits. "They're tossing your house," I thought. "Defend it." A stronger pull in my gut, as if I were lifting a heavy weight. Then the display cases blew open. I heard the shuffling of stiff cloth like sails in the wind. and was dimly aware of 4 pale white shapes in motion, 2 heading to either door. Wayne yelled first as the empty Elvis suit tackled him. His shotgun lit up the dark. Then, to my left, Jared shouted in surprise. A heavy clump told me he'd been knocked over. I decided to go in Jared's direction. Better an off-balance bloke than one with a shotgun. I slipped through the doorway and down a hall, leaving Jared scuffling behind me and yelling, "Get off! Get off!" "Take him while he's down," Isis urged. "Burn him to ashes." Part of me knew she had a point. If I left Jared in one piece, he would be up in no time and after me again. But it didn't seem right to hurt him, especially when he was being tackled by Elvis suits. I found a door and burst outside into the afternoon sunlight. I was in the backyard of Graceland. A large fountain gurgled nearby, ringed by grave markers. One had a glass-encased flame at the top and was heaped with flowers. I took a wild guess. It must be Elvis's. A magician's tomb. Of course! We'd been searching the house, but the item of power would be at his gravesite. But what exactly was the item? Before I could approach the grave, the door bust open. The big bald man with a straggly beard stumbled out. A tattered Elvis suit had its sleeves wrapped around his neck, like it was getting a piggyback ride. Well, well, the magician threw off the jumpsuit. His voice confirmed for me that he was the one called Jared. "You're just a little girl. You've caused us a lot of trouble, Missy." He lowered his staff and fired a shot of green light. I raised my wand and deflected the bolt of energy straight up. I heard a surprised coo, the cry of a pigeon, and a newly made lizard fell out of the sky at my feet. "Sorry," I told it. Jared snarled and threw down his staff. Apparently, he specialized in lizards, because the staff morphed into a Komodo dragon the size of a London taxicab. The monster charged me with unnatural speed. It opened its jaws and it would have bitten me in half, but I had just time enough to wedge my staff in its mouth. Jared laughed. "Nice try, girl." I felt the dragon's jaws pressing on the staff. It was only a matter of seconds before the wood snapped, and then I'd be a Komodo dragon's snack. "A little help," I told Isis. Carefully, very carefully, I tapped into her strength. Doing so without letting her take over was like riding a surfboard over a tidal wave, trying desperately to stay on my feet. I felt 5,000 years of experience, knowledge, and power course through me. She offered me options, and I selected the simplest. I channeled power through my staff and felt it grow hot in my hands, glowing white. The dragon hissed and gurgled as my staff elongated, forcing the creature's jaws open wider, wider, and then boom! The dragon shattered into kindling and sent the splintered remains of Jared's staff raining down on me. Jared had only a moment to look stunned before I threw my wand and whacked him solidly on the forehead. His eyes crossed and he collapsed on the pavement. My wand returned to my hand. That would have been a lovely happy ending, except I'd forgotten about Wayne. The cowboy-hatted magician stumbled out the door, almost tripping over his friend, but he recovered with lightning speed. He shouted, "Wind!" and my staff flew out of my hand and into his. He smiled cruelly. "Well fought, darling, but elemental magic is always quickest." He struck the ends of both staffs, his and mine, against the pavement. A wave rippled over the dirt and pavement as if the ground had become liquid, knocking me off my feet and sending my wand flying. I scrambled backwards on hands and knees, but I could hear Wayne chanting, summoning fire from the staffs. "Rope," Isis said. "Every magician carries rope." Panic had made my mind go blank, but my hand instinctively went for my magic bag. I pulled out a bit of twine, hardly a rope, but it triggered a memory, something Zia had done in the New York Museum. I threw the twine at Wayne and yelled a word Isis suggested. Toss! A golden hieroglyph burned in the air over Wayne's head. The twine whipped toward him like an angry snake, growing larger and thicker as it flew. Wayne's eyes widened. He stumbled back and set jets of flame shooting from both staffs, but the rope was too quick. It lashed around his ankles and toppled him sideways, wrapping around his whole body until he was encased in a twine cocoon from chin to toes. He struggled and screamed and called me quite a few unflattering names. I got up unsteadily. Jared was still out cold. I retrieved my staff, which had fallen next to Wayne. He continued straining against the twine and cursing in Egyptian, which sounded strange with an American Southern accent. Finish him, Isis warned. He can still speak. He will not rest until he destroys you. Fire, Wayne screamed. Water, cheese. Even the cheese command did not work. I reckoned his rage was throwing his magic off balance, making it impossible to focus, but I knew he would recover soon. Silence, I said. Wayne's voice abruptly stopped working. He kept screaming, but no sound came out. I'm not your enemy, I told him, but I can't have you killing me either. Something wriggled in my pocket, and I remembered Carter. I took him out. He looked okay, except, of course, for the fact he was still a lizard. I'll try to change you back, I told him. Hopefully I don't make things worse. He made a little croak that didn't convey much confidence. I closed my eyes and imagined Carter as he should be. A tall boy of 14, badly dressed, very human, very annoying. Carter began to feel heavy in my hands. I put him down and watched as the lizard grew into a vaguely human blob. By the count of 3, my brother was laying on his stomach, his sword and pack next to him on the lawn. He spit out grass. How'd you do that? I don't know, I admitted. You just seemed wrong. Thanks a lot. He got up and checked to make sure he had all his fingers. Then he saw the 2 magicians and his mouth fell open. What did you do to them? Just tied one up, knocked one out. Magic? No, I mean... He faltered, searching for words, then gave up and pointed. I looked at the magicians and yelped. Wayne wasn't moving. His eyes and mouth were open, but he wasn't blinking or breathing. Next to him, Jared looked just as frozen. As we watched, their mouths began to glow, as if they'd swallowed matches. 2 tiny yellow orbs of fire popped out from between their lips and shot into the air, disappearing into sunlight. What was that? I asked. Are they dead? Carter approached them cautiously and put his hand on Wayne's neck. It doesn't even feel like skin, more like rock. No, they were human. I didn't turn them to rock. Carter felt Jared's forehead where I'd whacked him with my wand. It's cracked. What? Carter picked up his sword. Before I could even scream, he brought down the hilt on Jared's face, and the magician's head cracked into shards like a flower pot. They're made of clay, Carter said. They're both Shapti. He kicked Wayne's arm, and I heard it crunch under the twine. But they were casting spells, I said, and talking. They were real. As we watched, the Shapti crumbled to dust, leaving nothing behind but my bit of twine, 2 staffs, and some grungy clothes. Thoth was testing us, Carter guessed. Those balls of fire, though. He frowned as if trying to recall something important. Probably the magic that animated them, I guessed. Flying back to their master, like a recording of what they did? It sounded like a solid theory to me, but Carter seemed awfully troubled. He pointed to the blasted back door of Graceland. Is the whole house like that? Worse. I looked at the ruined Elvis jumpsuit under Jared's clothes and scattered rhinestones. Maybe Elvis had no taste, but I still felt bad about trashing the king's palace. If the place had been important to Dad, suddenly an idea perked me up. What was it Amos said when he repaired that saucer? Carter frowned. This is a whole house, Sadie, not a saucer. Got it, I said. Hainim. A gold hieroglyphic symbol flickered to life in my palm. I held it up and blew it toward the house. The entire outline of Graceland began to glow. The pieces of the door flew back into place and mended themselves. The tattered bits of Elvis clothing disappeared. Wow, Carter said. Do you think the inside is fixed too? My vision blurred and my knees buckled. I would have knocked my head on the pavement if Carter hadn't caught me. It's okay, he said. You did a lot of magic, Sadie. That was amazing. But we haven't even found the item Thoth sent us for. Yeah, Carter said. Maybe we have. He pointed to Elvis's grave, and I saw it clearly. A memento left behind by some adoring fan. A necklace with a silver looped topped cross, just like the one on Mum's t-shirt in my old photograph. An ankh, I said, the Egyptian symbol for eternal life. Carter picked it up. There was a small papyrus scroll attached to the chain. What's this? He murmured and unrolled the sheet. He stared at it so hard I thought he'd burn a hole in it. What? I looked over his shoulder. The painting looked quite ancient. It showed a golden, spotted cat holding a knife in one paw and chopping the head off a snake. Beneath it, in black marker, someone had written, "Keep up the fight." That's vandalism, isn't it? I said. Marking up an ancient drawing like that? Rather an odd thing to leave for Elvis. Carter didn't seem to hear. I've seen this picture before. It's in a lot of tombs. Don't know why it never occurred to me before. I studied the picture more closely. Something about it did seem rather familiar. You know what it means? I asked. It's the cat of Ra, fighting the sun god's main enemy, Apophis. The snake, I said. Yeah, Apophis was the embodiment of chaos, I said, remembering what Newt had said. Carter looked impressed, as well he should have. Exactly. Apophis was even worse than Seth. The Egyptians thought doomsday would come when Apophis ate the sun and destroyed all of creation. But the cat killed it, I said hopefully. The cat had to kill it over and over again, Carter said. Like what Thoth said about repeating patterns. The thing is, I asked Dad one time if the cat had a name, and he said nobody knows for sure, but most people assume it's Sekhmet, this fierce lion goddess. She was called the Eye of Ra because she did his dirty work. He saw an enemy, she killed it. Fine, so? So the cat doesn't look like Sekhmet. It just occurred to me. I finally saw it, and a shiver went down my back. The cat of Ra looks exactly like Muffin. It's Bast. Just then the ground rumbled. The memorial fountain began to glow, and a dark doorway opened. Come on, I said. I've got some questions for Thoth. And then I'm going to punch him in the beak. The Red Pyramid. Chapter 25. We win an all-expenses-paid trip to death. Being turned into a lizard can really mess up your day. As we stepped through the doorway, I tried to hide it, but I was feeling pretty bad. You're probably thinking, hey, you already turned into a falcon, what's the big deal? But someone else forcing you into another form, that's totally different. Imagine yourself in a trash compactor, your entire body smashed into a shape smaller than your hand. It's painful and it's humiliating. Your enemy pictures you as a stupid, harmless lizard, then imposes their will on you, overpowering your thoughts until you have to be what they want you to be. I guess it could have been worse. He could have pictured me as a fruit bat. But still. Of course, I felt grateful to Sadie for saving me, but I also felt like a complete loser. It was bad enough that I'd embarrassed myself on the basketball court with a bunch of baboons, but I totally failed in battle. Maybe I'd done okay with Leroy, the airport monster, but faced with a couple of magicians, even clay ones, I got turned into a reptile in the first 2 seconds. How would I stand a chance against Seth? I was shaken out of those thoughts when we emerged from the portal, because we were definitely not in Thoth's office. In front of us loomed a life-size glass and metal pyramid, almost as big as the ones at Giza. The skyline of downtown Memphis rose up in the distance. At our backs were the banks of the Mississippi River. The sun was setting, turning the river and the pyramid to gold. On the pyramid's front steps, next to a 20-foot-tall pharaoh statue labeled Ramses the Great, Thoth had set out a picnic with barbecued ribs and brisket, bread and pickles, the works. He was playing his guitar with a portable amp. Khufu stood by, covering his ears. "Oh, good." Thoth strummed a chord that sounded like the death cry of a sick donkey. "You lived." I stared up at the pyramid in amazement. Where did this come from? You didn't just build this, did you? I remembered my Ba trip to Seth's pyramid and suddenly pictured gods building monuments all over the U.S. Thoth chuckled. I didn't have to build it. The people of Memphis did that. Humans never really forget Egypt, you know. Every time they build a city on the banks of a river, they remember their heritage, buried deep in their subconscious. This is the pyramid arena, 6th largest pyramid in the world. It could be used as a sports arena for, what is that game you like, Khufu? Ah! Khufu said indignantly, and I swear he gave me a dirty look. Yes, basketball, Thoth said. But the arena fell on hard times. It's been abandoned for years. Well, no longer. I'm moving in. Do you have the Ankh? For a moment, I wondered if it had been such a good idea helping Thoth. But we needed him. I tossed him the necklace. Excellent, he said. An Ankh from the tomb of Elvis. Powerful magic. Sadie clenched her fist. We almost died getting that. You tricked us. Not a trick, he insisted. A test. Those things, Sadie said, the Shapti. Yes, my best work in centuries. Ashamed to break them. But I couldn't have you beating up on real magicians, could I? Shapti make excellent stunt doubles. So you saw the whole thing? I muttered. Oh, yes. Thoth held out his hands. 2 little fires danced across his palm. The magic essences we'd seen escape from the Shapti's mouths. These are recording devices, I suppose you'd say. I got a full report. You defeated the Shapti without killing. I must admit I'm impressed, Sadie. You controlled your magic and controlled Isis. And you, Carter, did well turning into a lizard. I thought he was teasing me. Then I realized there was genuine sympathy in his eyes, as if my failure had also been some kind of test. You will find worse enemies ahead, Carter, he warned. Even now, the House of Life sends its best against you. But you will also find friends where you least expect them. I didn't know why, but I got the feeling he was talking about Zia. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking. Thoth stood and handed Khufu his guitar. He tossed the Ankh at the statue of Ramses, and the necklace fastened itself around the pharaoh's neck. There you are, Ramses, Thoth said to the statue. Here's to our new life. The statue glowed faintly, as if the sunset had just gotten 10 times brighter. Then the glow spread to the entire pyramid before slowly fading. Oh, yes, Thoth mused. I think I'll be happy here. Next time you children visit me, I'll have a much bigger laboratory. Scary thought, but I tried to stay focused. That's not all we found, I said. You need to explain this. I held out the painting of the cat and the snake. It's a cat and a snake, Thoth said. Thank you, God of Wisdom. You placed it there for us to find, didn't you? You're trying to give us some kind of clue. Who, me? Just kill him, Horus said. Shut up, I said. At least kill the guitar. The cat is Bast, I said, trying to ignore my inner psycho falcon. Does this have something to do with why our parents released the gods? Thoth gestured towards the picnic plates. Did I mention we have barbecue? Sadie stomped her foot. We had a deal, Jehudi. You know, I like that name, Thoth mused, but not so much when you say it. I believe our deal was that I would explain how to use the spell book. May I? He held out his hand. Reluctantly, I dug the magic book out of my bag and handed it over. Thoth unfolded the pages. This takes me back. So many formula. In the old days, we believed in ritual. A good spell might take weeks to prepare, with exotic ingredients from all over the world. We don't have weeks, I said. Rush, rush, rush. Thoth sighed. Khufu agreed, sniffing the guitar. Thoth closed the book and handed it back to me. Well, it's an incantation for destroying Seth. We know that, Sadie said. Will it destroy him forever? No, but it will destroy his form in this world, banishing him deep into the Duat and reducing his powers, so he will not be able to appear again for a long, long time. Centuries, most likely. Sounds good, I said. How do we read it? Thoth stared at me like the answer should be obvious. You cannot read it now because the words can only be spoken in Set's presence. Once before him, Sadie should open the book and recite the incantation. She'll know what to do when the time comes. Right, Sadie said, and Set will just stand there calmly while I read him to death. Thoth shrugged. I did not say it would be easy. You'll also require 2 ingredients for the spell to work. A verbal ingredient, Set's secret name. What? I protested. How are we supposed to get that? With difficulty, I'd imagine. You can't simply read a secret name from a book. The name must come from the owner's own lips, in his own pronunciation, to give you the power over him. Great, I said. So we just force Seth to tell us. Or trick him, Thoth said. Or convince him. Isn't there any other way? Sadie asked. Thoth brushed an ink splotch off his lab coat. A hieroglyph turning into a moth fluttered away. I suppose, yes. You could ask the person closest to Seth's heart, the person who loves him most. She would also have the ability to speak the name. But nobody loves Seth, Sadie said. His wife, I guessed. The other goddess, Nephthys. Thoth nodded. She's a river goddess. Perhaps you could find her in a river. This just gets better and better, I muttered. Sadie frowned at Thoth. You said there was another ingredient. A physical ingredient, Thoth agreed. A feather of truth. A what? Sadie asked. But I knew what he was talking about, and my heart sank. You mean from the land of the dead? Thoth beamed. Exactly. Wait, Sadie said. What is he talking about? I tried to conceal my fear. When you died in ancient Egypt, you had to take a journey to the land of the dead, I explained. A really dangerous journey. Finally, you made it to the Hall of Judgment, where your life was weighed on the scale of Anubis. Your heart on one side, the feather of truth on the other. If you passed the test, you were blessed with eternal happiness. If you failed, a monster ate your heart and you ceased to exist. Amit the Devourer, Thoth said wistfully. Cute little thing. Sadie blinked. So we're supposed to get a feather from this Hall of Judgment. How, exactly? Perhaps Anubis will be in a good mood, Thoth suggested. It happens every 1,000 years or so. But how do we even get to the land of the dead? I asked. I mean, without dying. Thoth gazed at the western horizon where the sunset was turning blood red. Down the river at night, I should think. That's how most people pass into the land of the dead. I would take a boat. You'll find Anubis at the end of the river. He pointed north, then changed his mind and pointed south. Forgot. Rivers flow south here. Everything is backward. Ah! Khufu ran his fingers down the frets of the guitar and ripped out a massive rock and roll riff. Then he belched as if nothing had happened and set down the guitar. Sadie and I just stared at him, but Thoth nodded as if the baboon had said something profound. Are you sure, Khufu? Thoth asked. Khufu grunted. Very well, Thoth said. Khufu says he would like to go with you. I told him he could stay here and type my doctoral thesis on quantum physics, but he's not interested. Can't imagine why, Sadie said. Glad to have Khufu along, but where do we find a boat? You are the blood of pharaohs, Thoth said. Pharaohs always have access to a boat. Just make sure you use it wisely. He nodded toward the river. Churning toward the shore was an old-fashioned paddle wheel steamboat with smoke billowing from its stacks. I wish you a good journey, Thoth said, until we meet again. We're supposed to take that? I asked, but when I turned to look at Thoth, he was gone, and he'd taken the barbecue with him. Wonderful, Sadie muttered. Ah, Khufu agreed. He took our hands and led us down to the shore. The Red Pyramid, Chapter 26, Aboard the Egyptian Queen. As far as rides to the land of the dead go, the boat was pretty cool. It had multiple decks with ornate railings painted black and green. The side paddle wheels churned the river into froth, and along the paddle wheel housings, the name of the boat glittered in gold letters, Egyptian Queen. At first glance, you'd think the boat was just a tourist attraction, one of those floating casinos or cruise boats for old people. But if you look closer, you started noticing strange little details. The boat's name was written in Demotic and in hieroglyphics underneath the English. Sparkly smoke billowed from the stacks as if the engines were burning gold. Orbs of multicolored fire fluttered around the decks, and on the prow of the ship, 2 painted eyes moved and blinked, scanning the river for trouble. That's odd, Sadie remarked. I nodded. I've never seen eyes painted on boats before. They still do that all over the Mediterranean, but usually they don't move. What? No, not the stupid eyes. The lady on the highest deck, isn't that? Sadie broke into a grin. Bast! Sure enough, our favorite feline was leaning out the window of the pilot's house. I was about to wave at her when I noticed a creature standing next to Bast, gripping the wheel. It had a human body and was dressed in the white uniform of a boat captain. But instead of a head, a double-bladed axe sprouted from his collar. And I'm not talking about a small axe for chopping wood. I'm talking battle axe. Twin crescent-shaped iron blades, one in front where his face should be, one in the back. The edges splattered with suspicious-looking dried red splotches. The ship pulled up to the dock. Balls of fire began zipping around, lowering the gangplank, tying off ropes, and basically doing crew-type stuff. How they did it without hands and without setting anything on fire, I don't know. But it wasn't the strangest thing I'd seen that week. Bass climbed down from the wheelhouse. She hugged us as we came aboard. Even Khufu, who tried to return the favor by grooming lice for her. I'm glad you survived, Bess told us. What happened? We gave her the basic and her hair poofed out again. Elvis! Ugh! Thoth is getting cruel in his old age. Well, I can't say I'm glad to be on this boat again. I hate water. But I suppose... You've been on this boat before? I asked. Bass's smile wavered. A million questions as usual, but let's eat first. The captain is waiting. I wasn't anxious to meet a giant axe, and I wasn't enthusiastic about another one of Bass' grilled cheese and Friskies dinner, but we followed her inside the boat. The dining parlor was lavishly decorated in Egyptian style. Colorful murals depicting the gods covered the walls. Gilded columns supported the ceiling. A long dining table was laden with every kind of food you could want. Sandwiches, pizza, hamburgers, Mexican food, you name it. It way made up for missing Thoth's barbecue. On a side table stood an ice chest, a line of golden goblets, and a soda dispenser with about 20 different choices. The mahogany chairs were carved to look like baboons, which reminded me a little too much of Graceland's jungle room, which Khufu thought they were okay. He barked at his chair just to show it who was top monkey, then sat on its lap. He picked an avocado from a basket of fruit and started peeling it. Across the room, a door opened, and the axe dude came in. He had to duck to avoid cleaving the door frame. Lord and Lady Kane, the captain said, bowing. His voice was a quivering hum that resonated along his front blade. I saw a video game one time of a guy playing music by hitting a saw with a hammer, and that's sort of the way the captain sounded. It is an honor to have you aboard. Lady Kane, Sadie mused. I like that. I am Bloodstained Blade, the captain said. What are your orders? Sadie raised an eyebrow at Bast. He takes orders from us? Within reason, Bast said. He is bound to your family. Your father... She cleared her throat. Well, he and your mother summoned this boat. The axe-demon made an disapproving hum. You haven't told them, goddess? I'm getting to it, Bast grumbled. Told us what? I asked. Just details, she rushed on. The boat can be summoned once a year and only if in times of great need. You'll need to give the captain your orders now. He must have clear directions if we're to proceed safely. I wondered what was bothering Bast, but the axe dude was waiting for orders, and the flecks of dried blood on his blades told me I'd better not keep him waiting. We need to visit the Hall of Judgment, I told him. Take us to the land of the dead. Bloodstained Blade hummed thoughtfully. I will make the arrangements, Lord Kane, but it will take time. We don't have a lot of that. I turned to Sadie. It's, the evening of the 27th? She nodded in agreement. Day after tomorrow at sunrise, Seth completes his pyramid and destroys the world unless we stop him. So yes, Captain Very Large Blade, or whatever it is, I'd say we're in a bit of a rush. We will, of course, do our best, said Bloodstained Blade, though his voice sounded a little, sharp. The crew will prepare your staterooms. Will you dine while you wait? I looked at the table laden with food and realized how hungry I was. I hadn't eaten since we were in the Washington Monument. Yeah, thanks, BSB. The captain bowed again, which made him look a little too much like a guillotine. Then he left us to our dinner. At first, I was too busy eating to talk. I inhaled a roast beef sandwich, a couple of pieces of cherry pie with ice cream, and 3 glasses of ginger ale before I finally came up for air. Sadie didn't eat as much. Then again, she'd had lunch on the plane. She settled for a cheese and cucumber sandwich and one of those weird British drinks she likes, a Ribena. Khufu carefully picked out everything that ended with O. Doritos, Oreos, and some chunks of meat. Buffalo? Armadillo? I was scared to even guess. The balls of fire floated attentively around the room, refilling our goblets and clearing away our plates as we finished. After so many days spent running for our lives, it felt good to just sit at a dinner table and relax. The captain's informing us that he couldn't transport us instantly to the land of the dead was the best news I'd had in a long time. Ah! Khufu wiped his mouth and grabbed one of the balls of fire. He fashioned it into a glowing basketball and snorted at me. For once, I was pretty sure what he'd said in Baboon. It wasn't an invitation. It meant something like, I'm going to play basketball by myself now. I will not invite you because your lack of skill would make me throw up. No problem, man, I said, though my face felt hot with embarrassment. Have fun. Khufu snorted again and loped off with the ball under his arm. I wondered if he'd find a court somewhere on board. At the far end of the table, Bast pushed her plate away. She'd hardly touched her tuna friskies. Not hungry? I asked. Oh, I suppose not. She turned her goblet listlessly. She was wearing an expression I didn't associate with cats. Guilt. Sadie and I locked eyes. We had a brief, silent exchange, something like, you ask her. No, you. Of course, Sadie's better at giving dirty looks, so I lost the contest. Bast, I said. What did the captain want you to tell us? She hesitated. Oh, that. You shouldn't listen to demons. Bloodstained Blade is bound by magic to serve. But if he ever got loose, he'd use that axe on all of us. Believe me. You're changing the subject, I said. Bast traced her fingers along the table, drawing hieroglyphics in the condensation ring from her goblet. The truth? I haven't been on board since the night your mother died. Your parents had docked this boat on the Thames after the accident. Your father brought me here. This is where we made our deal. I realized she meant right here, at this table. My father had sat here in despair after Mom's death, with no one to console him except the cat goddess, an axe demon, and a bunch of floating lights. I studied Bast's face in the dim light. I thought about the paintings we'd found at Graceland. Even in human form, Bast looked so much like a cat drawn by some artist thousands of years ago. It wasn't just a chaos monster, was it? I asked. Bast eyed me. What do you mean? The thing you were fighting when our parents released you from the obelisk. It wasn't just a chaos monster. You were fighting Apophis. All around the parlor, the servant fires dimmed. One dropped a plate and fluttered nervously. Don't say the serpent's name, Bast warned, especially as we head into the night. Night is his realm. It's true, then. Sadie shook her head in dismay. Why didn't you say anything? Why did you lie to us? Bast dropped her gaze. Sitting in the shadows, she looked weary and frail. Her face was etched with the traces of old battle scars. I was the Eye of Ra, she spoke quietly. The sun god's champion, the instrument of his will. Do you have any idea what an honor it was? She extended her claws and studied them. When people see pictures of Ra's warrior cat, they assume it's Sekhmet, the lioness. And she was his first champion, it's true. But she was too violent, too out of control. Eventually, Sekhmet was forced to step down, and Ra chose me as his fighter. Little Bast. Why do you sound ashamed? Sadie asked. You said it's an honor. At first, I was proud, Sadie. I fought the serpent for ages. Cats and snakes are mortal enemies. I did my job well. But then Ra withdrew to the heavens. He bound me to the serpent with his last spell. He cast us both into the abyss, where I was charged to fight the serpent and keep it down forever. A realization crept over me. So you weren't a minor prisoner. You were imprisoned longer than any of the other gods. She closed her eyes. I still remember Ra's words. My loyal cat, this is your greatest duty. And I was proud to do it for centuries, then millennia. Can you imagine what it was like? Knives against fangs, slashing and thrashing, a never-ending war in the darkness. Our life forces grew weaker, my enemies and mine, and I began to realize that was Ra's plan. The serpent and I would rip each other into nothingness, and the world would be safe. Only in this way could Ra withdraw in peace of mind, knowing chaos would not overcome Ma'at. I would have done my duty, too. I had no choice until your parents gave you an escape route, I said, and you took it. Bass looked up miserably. I am the queen of cats. I have many strengths. But to be honest, Carter, cats are not very brave. And your enemy? He stayed trapped in the abyss. Your father and I were sure of it. The serpent was already greatly weakened from eons of fighting with me. And when your mother used her own life force to close the abyss, well, she worked a powerful feat of magic. There should have been no way for the serpent to break through that kind of seal. But as the years have gone by, we become less and less sure the prison would hold him. If somehow he managed to escape and regain his strength, I cannot imagine what would happen, and it would be my fault. I tried to imagine the serpent, Apophis, a creature of chaos even worse than Seth. I pictured Bast with her knives, locked in combat with that monster for eons. Maybe I should have been angry at Bast for not telling us the truth earlier. Instead, I felt sorry for her. She'd been put in the worst position, in the same position we were in now, forced to do a job that was way too big for her. So why did my parents release you? I asked. Did they say? She nodded slowly. I was losing my fight. Your father told me that your mother had foreseen horrible things if the serpent overcame me. They had to free me, give me time to heal. They said it was the first step in restoring the gods. I don't pretend to understand their whole plan. I was relieved to take your father's offer. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing for the gods. But it does not change the fact that I was a coward. I failed in my duty. It isn't your fault, I told her. It wasn't fair of Ra to ask of you. Carter's right, Sadie said. That's too much sacrifice for one person. One cat goddess, whatever. It was my king's will, Bass said. The pharaoh can command his subjects for the good of the kingdom, even to lay down their lives, and they must obey. Horus knows this. He was the pharaoh many times. She speaks truly, Horus said. Then you had a stupid king, I said. The boat shuddered, as if we'd ground the keel over a sandbar. Be careful, Carter, Bass warned. Ma'at, the order of creation, hinges on loyalty to the rightful king. If you question it, you'll fall under the influence of chaos. I felt so frustrated. I wanted to break something. I wanted to yell that the order didn't seem much better than chaos if you had to get yourself killed for it. You are being childish, Horus scolded. You are a servant of Ma'at. These thoughts are unworthy. My eyes stung. Then maybe I'm unworthy. Carter? Sadie asked. Nothing, I said. I'm going to bed. I stormed off. Another of the flickering lights joined me, guiding me upstairs to my quarters. The stateroom was probably very nice. I didn't pay attention. I just fell on the bed and passed out. I seriously needed an extra strength magic pillow because my ba refused to stay put. And no, Sadie, I don't think wrapping my head in duct tape would have worked either. My spirit floated up to the steamboat's wheelhouse, but it wasn't Bloodstained Blade at the wheel. Instead, a young man in leather armor navigated the boat. His eyes were outlined with kohl, and his head was bald except for a braided ponytail. The guy definitely worked out, because his arms were ripped. A sword like mine was strapped to his belt. "The river is treacherous," he told me in a familiar voice. "A pilot cannot get distracted. He must always be alert for sandbars and hidden snags. That's why boats are painted with my eyes, you know, to see the dangers." "The eyes of Horus," I said. "You." The falcon god glanced at me, and I saw that his eyes were two different colors, one blazing yellow like the sun, and the other reflective silver like the moon. The effect was so disorienting I had to look away, and when I did, I noticed that Horus's shadow didn't match his form. Stretched across the wheelhouse was the silhouette of a giant falcon. "You wonder if order is better than chaos," he said. "You become distracted from our real enemy, Seth. You should be taught a lesson." I was about to say, "No, really, that's okay." But immediately, my ba was whisked away. Suddenly, I was on board an airplane. A big international aircraft like the planes my dad and I taken 1,000,000 times. Zia Rashid, Desjardins, and 2 other magicians were scrunched up in a middle row, surrounded by families with screaming children. Zia didn't seem to mind. She meditated calmly with her eyes closed, while Desjardins and the other 2 men looked so uncomfortable I almost wanted to laugh. The plane rocked back and forth. Desjardins spilled wine all over his lap. The seatbelt light blinked on, and a voice crackled over the intercom. "This is the captain. Looks like we'll be experiencing some minor turbulence as we make our descent into Dallas. So I'm going to ask the flight attendants." Boom! A blast rattled the windows. Lightning followed immediately by thunder. Zia's eyes snapped open. "The Red Lord." The passengers screamed as the plane plummeted several hundred feet. "Il commence!" Desjardins shouted over the noise. "Quickly!" As the plane shook, passengers shrieked and grabbed their seats. Desjardins got up and opened the overhead compartment. "Sir!" a flight attendant yelled. "Sir, sit down!" Desjardins ignored the attendant. He grabbed 4 familiar bags, magician toolkits, and threw them to his colleagues. Then things really went wrong. A horrible shudder passed through the cabin and the plane lurched sideways. Outside the right-hand window, I saw the plane's wing get sheared off by a 500-mile-an-hour wind. The cabin devolved into chaos. Drinks, books, and shoes flying everywhere, oxygen masks dropping and tangling, people screaming for their lives. "Protect the innocents," Desjardins ordered. The plane began to shake and crack. Cracks appeared in the windows and walls. The passengers were silent, slumping into unconsciousness as the air pressure dropped. The 4 magicians raised their wands as the airplane broke into pieces. For a moment, the magicians floated in a maelstrom of storm clouds, chunks of fuelage, luggage, and spinning passengers still strapped to their seats. Then a white glow expanded around them, a bubble of power that slowed the breakup of the plane and kept the pieces swirling in a tight orbit. Desjardins reached out his hand, and the edge of a cloud stretched toward him. A tendril of cottony white mist, like a safety line. The other magicians did likewise, and the storm bent to their will. White vapor wrapped around them and began to send out more tendrils, like funnel clouds, which snatched pieces of the plane and pulled them back together. A child fell past Zia, but she pointed her staff and murmured a spell. A cloud enveloped the little girl and brought her back. Soon the 4 magicians were reassembling the plane around them, sealing the breaches with cloudy cobwebs until the entire cabin was encased in a glowing cocoon of vapor. Outside, the storm raged and thunder boomed, but the passengers slept soundly in their seats. "Zia!" Desjardins shouted. "We can't hold this for long." Zia ran past him up the aisle to the flight deck. Somehow the front of the plane had survived the breakup intact. The door was armored and locked, but Zia's staff flared, and the door melted like wax. She stepped through and found 3 unconscious pilots. The view through the window was enough to make me sick. Through the spiraling clouds, the ground was coming up. Very fast. Zia slammed her wand against the controls. Red energy surged through the displays. Dials spun, meters blinked, and the altimeter leveled out. The plane's nose came up, its speed dropping. As I watched, Zia guided the plane toward a cow pasture and landed it without even a bump. Then her eyes rolled back in her head and she collapsed. Desjardins found her and gathered her in his arms. "Quickly," he told his colleagues. "The mortals will wake soon." They dragged Zia out of the cockpit, and my ba was swept away through a blur of images. I saw Phoenix again, or at least some of the city. A massive red sandstorm churned across the valley, swallowing buildings and mountains. In the harsh, hot wind, I heard Seth laughing, reveling in his power. Then I saw Brooklyn, Amos's ruined house on the East River, and a winter storm raging overhead, howling winds slamming the city with sleet and hail. And then I saw a place I didn't recognize, a river winding through a desert canyon. The sky was a blanket of pitch-black clouds, and the river's surface seemed to boil. Something was moving under the water, something huge, evil, and powerful, and I knew it was waiting for me. "This is only the beginning," Horace warned me. "Seth will destroy everyone you care about. Believe me, I know." The river became a marsh of tall reeds. The sun blazed overhead. Snakes and crocodiles slid through the water. At the water's edge sat a thatched hut. Outside it, a woman and a child of about 10 stood examining a battered sarcophagus. I could tell the coffin had once been a work of art, gold encrusted with gems, but now it was dented and black with grime. The woman ran her hand over the coffin's lid. Finally, she had my mother's face, blue eyes, and caramel-colored hair, but she glowed with magical radiance, and I knew I was looking at the goddess Isis. She turned to the boy. "We have searched so long, my son. Finally, we have retrieved him. I will use my magic and give him life again." "Papa?" The boy gazed wide-eyed at the box. "He's really inside?" "Yes, Horace, and now..." Suddenly, their hut erupted into flames. The god Seth stepped from the inferno. A mighty red-skinned warrior with smoldering black eyes. He wore the double crown of Egypt and the robes of a pharaoh. In his hands, an iron staff smoldered. "Found the coffin, did you?" he said. "Good for you." Isis reached towards the sky. She summoned lightning against the god of chaos, but Seth's rod absorbed the attack, and it reflected it back at her. Arcs of electricity blasted the goddess and sent her sprawling. "Mother!" The boy drew a knife and charged Seth. "I'll kill you!" Seth bellowed with laughter. He easily sidestepped the boy and kicked him into the dirt. "You have spirit, nephew," Seth admitted, "but you won't live long enough to challenge me. As for your father, I'll just have to dispose of him more permanently." Seth slammed his iron staff against the coffin's lid. Isis screamed as the coffin shattered like ice. "Make a wish." Seth blew with all his might, and the shards of coffin flew into the sky, scattering in all directions. "Poor Osiris, he's gone to pieces, scattered all over Egypt now. And as for you, Sister Isis, run. That's what you do best." Seth lunged forward. Isis grabbed her son's hand, and they both turned into birds, flying for their lives. The scene faded, and I was back in the steamboat's wheelhouse. The sun rose and fast forward as towns and barges sped past, and the banks of the Mississippi blurred into a play of light and shadow. He destroyed my father, Horace told me. He will do the same to yours. No, I said. Horace fixed me with those strange eyes, one blazing gold, one full moon silver. My mother and Aunt Nephtes spent years searching for the pieces of the coffin and father's body. When they collected all 14, my cousin Anubis helped bind my father back together with mummy wrappings, but still, mother's magic could not bring him back to life fully. Osiris became an undead god, a half-living shadow of my father, fit to rule only in the Duat. But his loss gave me anger. Anger gave me the strength to defeat Seth and take the throne for myself. You must do the same. I don't want a throne, I said. I want my dad. Don't deceive yourself. Seth is merely toying with you. He will bring you to despair, and your sorrow will make you weak. I have to save my dad. That is not your mission, Horace chided. The world is at stake. Now wake. Sadie was shaking my arm. She and Bass stood over me, looking concerned. What? I asked. We're here, Sadie said nervously. She changed into a fresh linen outfit, black this time, which matched her combat boots. She'd even managed to re-dye her hair so the streaks were blue. I sat up and realized I felt rested for the first time in a week. My soul may have been traveling, but at least my body had gotten some sleep. I glanced out the stateroom window. It was pitch black outside. How long was I out? I demanded. We've sailed down most of the Mississippi and into the Duat, Bass said. Now we approach the first cataract. The first cataract? I asked. The entrance, Bass said grimly. To the land of the dead. The Red Pyramid, Chapter 27, A Demon with Free Samples. Me? I slept like the dead, which I hoped wasn't a sign of things to come. I could tell Carter's soul had been wandering through some frightening places, but he wouldn't talk about them. Did you see Zia? I asked. He looked so rattled, I thought his face would fall off. Knew it, I said. We followed Bast up to the wheelhouse where Bloodstained Blade was studying a map while Khufu manned, Baboon the wheel. The baboon is driving, I noted. Should I be worried? Quiet, please, Lady Kane. Bloodstained Blade ran his fingers over a long stretch of papyrus map. This is delicate work. 2 degrees to starboard, Khufu. Ah! Khufu said. The sky was already dark, but as we chugged along, the stars disappeared. The river turned the color of blood. Darkness swallowed the horizon, and along the river banks, the lights of towns changed to flickering fires, then winked out completely. Now our only lights were the multicolored servant fires and the glittering smoke that bloomed from the smokestacks, washing us all in a weird metallic glow. Should be just ahead, the captain announced. In the dim light, his red-flicked axe blade looked scarier than ever. What's that map? I asked. Spells of coming forth by day, he said. Don't worry, it's a good copy. I looked at Carter for a translation. Most people call it the Book of the Dead, he told me. Rich Egyptians were always buried with a copy, so they could have directions through the Duat to the land of the dead. It's like an idiot's guide to the afterlife. The captain hummed indignantly. I am no idiot, Lord Kane. No, I just meant... Carter's voice faltered. What is that? Ahead of us, crags of rock jutted from the river like fangs, turning the water into a boiling mass of rapids. The first cataract, Bloodstained Blade announced. Hold on. Khufu pushed the wheel to the left, and the steamboat skidded sideways, shooting between 2 rocky spires with only centimeters to spare. I'm not much of a screamer, but I'll readily admit that I screamed my head off. And don't look at me like that, Carter. You weren't much better. We dropped over a stretch of white water, or red water, and swerved to avoid a rock the size of Paddington Station. The steamboat made 2 more suicidal turns between boulders, did a 360 spin around a swirling vortex, launched over a 10-meter waterfall, and came crashing down so hard my ears popped like a gunshot. We continued downstream as if nothing had happened, the roar of the rapids fading behind us. I don't like cataracts, I decided. Are there more? Not as large, thankfully, said Bast, who was also looking seasick. We've crossed over into the land of the dead, Carter finished. He pointed to the shore, which was shrouded in mist. Strange things lurked in the darkness. Flickering ghost lights, giant faces made of fog, hulking shadows that seemed unconnected to anything physical. Along the riverbanks, old bones dragged themselves through the mud, linking with each other in random bone patterns. I'm guessing this isn't the Mississippi, I said. The river of night, a blood-stained blade hummed. It is every river and no river. The shadow of the Mississippi, the Nile, the Thames, it flows throughout the Duat, with many branches and tributaries. Clears that right up, I muttered. The scenes got stranger. We saw ghost villages from ancient times, little clusters of reed huts made of flickering smoke. We saw vast temples crumbling and reconstructing themselves over and over again like a looped video. And everywhere, ghosts turned their faces toward our boat as we passed. Smoky hands reached out. Shades silently called to us, then turned away in despair as we passed. The lost and confused, Bass said. Spirits who never found their way to the Hall of Judgment. Why are they so sad? I asked. Well, they're dead, Carter speculated. No, it's more than that, I said. It's like they're expecting someone. Ra, Bass said. For eons, Ra's glorious sunboat would travel this route each night, fighting off the forces of Apophis. She looked around nervously, as if remembering old ambushes. It was dangerous, every night, a fight for existence. But as he passed, Ra would bring sunlight and warmth to the Duat, and these lost souls would rejoice, remembering the world of the living. But that's a legend, Carter said. The earth revolves around the sun. The sun never actually descends under the earth. Have you learned nothing of Egypt? Bass said. Conflicting stories can be equally true. The sun is a ball of fire in space, yes, but its image you see as it crosses the sky, the life-giving warmth and light it brings to the earth, that was embodied by Ra. The sun was his throne, his source of power, his very spirit. But now Ra has retreated into the heavens. He sleeps, and the sun is just the sun. Ra's boat no longer travels on its cycle through the Duat. He no longer lights the dark, and the dead feel his absence most keenly. Indeed, Bloodstained Blade said, though he didn't sound very upset about it. Legend says the world will end when Ra gets too tired to continue living in his weakened state. Apophis will swallow the sun, darkness will reign, chaos will overcome Ma'at, and the serpent will reign forever. Part of me thought this was absurd. The planets would not simply stop spinning. The sun would not cease to rise. On the other hand, here I was riding in a boat through the land of the dead with a demon and a god. If Apophis was real too, I didn't fancy meeting him. And to be honest, I felt guilty. If the story Thoth told me was true, Isis had caused Ra to retreat into the heavens with that secret name business, which meant, in a ridiculous, maddening way, The end of the world would be my fault. Bloody typical. I wanted to punch myself to get even with Isis, but I suspected it would hurt. Ra should wake up and smell the salab, I said. He should come back. Bass laughed without humor. And the world should be young again, Sadie. I wish it could be so. Khufu grunted and gestured ahead. He gave the captain back the wheel and ran out of the wheelhouse and down the stairs. The baboon is right, said Bloodstained Blade. You should get to the prow. A challenge will be coming soon. What sort of challenge? I asked. It's hard to tell, Bloodstained Blade said, and I thought I detected smug satisfaction to his voice. I wish you luck, Lady Kane. Why me? I grumbled. Bast, Carter, and I stood at the prow of the boat, watching the river appear out of the darkness. Below us, the boat's painted eyes glowed faintly in the dark, sweeping beams of light across the red water. Khufu had climbed to the top of the gangplank, which stood straight up when retracted, and cupped his hand over his eyes like a sailor in a crow's nest. But all that vigilance didn't do much good. With the dark and the mist, our visibility was nil. Massive rocks, broken pillars, and crumbling statues of pharaohs loomed out of nowhere, and Bloodstained Blade yanked the wheel to avoid them, forcing us to grab hold of the rails. Occasionally, we'd see long, slimy lines cutting through the surface of the water like tentacles, or the backs of submerged creatures. I really didn't want to know. Mortal souls are always challenged, Bass told me. You must prove your worth to enter the land of the dead. Like it's such a big treat? I'm not sure how long I stared into the darkness, but after a good while, a reddish smudge appeared in the distance, as if the sky were becoming lighter. Is that my imagination or our destination? Bass said. Strange. We really should have been challenged by now. Our destination. The boat shuddered, and the water began to boil. A giant figure erupted from the river. I could see him only from the waist up, but he towered several meters over the boat. His body was humanoid, bare-chested and hairy with purplish skin. A rope belt was tied around his waist, festooned with leather pouches, severed demon heads, and other charming bits and bobs. His head was a strange combination of lion and human, with gold eyes and a black mane done in dreadlocks. His blood-spattered mouth was feline, with bristly whiskers and razor-sharp fangs. He roared, scaring Khufu right off the gangplank. The poor baboon did a flying leap into Carter's arms, which knocked them both to the deck. You had to say something, I told Bast weakly. This is a relative of yours, I hope? Bass shook her head. I cannot help you with this, Sadie. You are the mortals. You must deal with the challenge. Oh, thanks for that. I am Shezmu, the bloody lion man said. I wanted to say, yes, you certainly are, but I decided to keep my mouth shut. He turned his golden eyes on Carter and tilted his head. His nostrils quivered. I smell the blood of pharaohs. A tasty treat. Or do you dare to name me? Name you? Carter sputtered. Do you mean your secret name? The demon laughed. He grabbed a nearby spire of rock, which crumbled like old plaster in his fist. I looked desperately at Carter. You don't happen to have his secret name lying around somewhere? It may be in the Book of the Dead, Carter said. I forgot to check. Well, I said. Keep him busy, Carter replied, and scrambled off to the wheelhouse. Keep a demon busy, I thought. Right. Maybe he fancies a game of tiddlywinks. Do you give up? Shezmu bellowed. No, I yelled. No, we don't give up. We will name you. Just, gosh, you're quite well muscled, aren't you? Do you work out? I glanced at Bast, who nodded approval. Shezmu rumbled with pride and flexed his mighty arms. Never fails with men, does it? Even if they're 20 meters tall and lion-headed. I am Shezmu, he bellowed. Yes, you might have mentioned that already, I said. I'm wondering, what sort of titles you've earned over the years, eh? Lord of this and that? I am Osiris's royal executioner, he yelled, smashing a fist into the water and rocking our boat. I am the Lord of blood and wine. Brilliant, I said, trying not to get sick. How are blood and wine connected exactly? Grr! He leaned forward and bared his fangs, which were not any prettier up close. His mane was matted with the nasty bits of dead fish and river moss. Lord Osiris lets me behead the wicked. I crush them into my wine press and make wine for the dead. I made a mental note not to drink the wine of the dead. You're doing well. Isis's voice gave me a start. She'd been quiet so long, I'd almost forgotten her. Ask him about his other duties. And what are your other duties? Oh, powerful wine demon guy. I am Lord of... He flexed his muscles for maximum effect. Perfume! He grinned at me, apparently waiting for terror to set in. Oh my, I said. That must make your enemies tremble. Ha ha ha, yes. Would you like a free sample? He ripped a slimy leather pouch off of his belt and brought out a clay pot filled with sweet-smelling yellow powder. I call this eternity. Lovely, I gagged. I glanced behind me, wondering where Carter had gone to, but there was no sign of him. Keep him talking, Isis urged. And, perfume is part of your job because... Wait, I've got it. You squeeze it out of plants like you squeeze wine or blood, Shezmu added. Well, naturally, I said. The blood goes without saying. Blood, he said. Khufu yelped and covered his eyes. So you serve Osiris? I asked the demon. Yes, at least. He hesitated, snarling in doubt. I did. Osiris's throne is empty, but he will return. He will. Of course, I said. And so your friends call you what? Shezi? Bloodseekins? I have no friends. But if I did, they would call me Slaughterer of Souls, Fierce of Face. But I don't have any friends, so my name is not in danger. I looked at Bass, wondering if I'd just gotten as lucky as I thought. Bass beamed at me. Carter came stumbling down the stairs, holding the Book of the Dead. I've got it somewhere here. Can't read this part, but... Name me or be eaten, Shezmu bellowed. I name you, I shouted back. Shezmu, Slaughterer of Souls, Fierce of Face. Gah! He writhed in pain. How do they always know? Let us pass, I commanded. Oh, and one more thing. My brother wants a free sample. I just had time to step away, and Carter just had time to look confused before the demon blew yellow dust all over him. Then Shezmu sank under the waves. What a nice fellow, I said. Carter spit perfume. He looked like a piece of breaded fish. What was that for? You smell lovely, I assured him. What's next, then? I was feeling very pleased with myself until our boat rounded a bend in the river. Suddenly, the reddish glow on the horizon became a blaze of light. Up in the wheelhouse, the captain rang the alarm bell. Ahead of us, the river was on fire, rushing through a steaming stretch of rapids towards what looked like a bubbling volcanic crater. The Lake of Fire, Bass said. This is where it gets interesting.